Food chains are composed of layers, if you want to call it that. But when we talk about food chains, we're talking about the way that matter and energy flow. And this is an important concept because of the fact that knowing the directional flow of matter and energy gives us a lot of information for research and for study. And knowing food chain components is not necessary down to the very individual population or individual organism or individual species. However, it is important whenever we're talking about kind of the general structure of an ecosystem. Think of an ecosystem or a food chain as the small part of an ecosystem that is one small stair step through an ecosystem. And so you look at an entire ecosystem itself, there may be multiple food chains within an ecosystem, but if you look closer, you will see that you can pick out individual ecosystems. For instance, you have an oak tree. Oak tree has leaves, oak tree has roots, an oak tree may give off acorns. There may be a multitude of primary consumers that feed on that oak tree. And then there may be a multitude of secondary consumers that feed on those primary consumers. And so when we start to talk about one individual food chain within that, we have to look much closer to look at what that food chain might look like or where that energy and matter may flow. So we're going to go to the board and we're going to look at what an actual food chain might resemble. Okay, so if we use an oak tree as an example, I'm just going to draw a little soil line here and just a rough draft of an oak tree. Let's say that we have acorns falling off the oak tree. The acorn itself represents matter and energy. And remember that matter came from the soil. The energy came from sunlight. So if something was to feed on an acorn, for in this case, let's say it was the deer, okay, the matter and energy flow from the acorn is going to go to the deer. Now, if something was to come along and eat the deer, let's say in this case a wolf, then the matter and energy would flow to the wolf. Now, again, part of the ecosystem are detritivores or decomposers. So if the wolf or the deer dies or gives off any kind of waste, then that energy and matter is going to go to the detritivores. So when we look at this graphically, I mean, this is the picture that we'd see like in a forest, is that we would see, you know, the matter and energy coming through the oak tree to the deer, to the wolf, and eventually to the detritivores. We can also do this in kind of I don't know, a mathematical model, I don't know, a diagram form, and then we could just do it like this: deer, wolf. If we want to put the decomposers out to the side, really any of this could go to the decomposers as well. One of the very important things to note about food chains, if you're trying to represent one, like I'm trying to do here, is that you want to make sure that the arrows point the correct direction. The arrows on a food chain indicate the direction of matter and energy flow. And if we go back to the board and look at our oak tree, the oak tree matter and energy is pointing towards the deer, and that indicates to anyone looking at this diagram that the matter and energy goes to the deer from the oak tree. And from the deer, the matter and energy would go to the wolf, and that would be the arrow pointing towards the wolf. It's very important that you indicate that if you're asked to do that on an AP Environmental Science test or any exam, because that tells the scientist that you know that the matter and energy flow is going a certain direction. And I have the arrows pointing towards the decomposers or detritivores to the side, because at any stage of that, any of the waste that comes from the food chain can go that direction at any point. I would never have the wolf energy going back to the deer, because deer don't eat wolves. And wolves don't eat oak trees for the most part. They eat meat. And so that's why we want to make sure that when we do our diagramming, that we have the arrows pointed towards the receiver of the matter and energy.